welcome everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Betty G. I'm co-hosting the Just an Hour series with Punya. Mishra, welcome to all of you who've agreed to be discussants today, and to those of you who are joining us for the conversation for just an hour.
And 35505.
I don't think that was me, but I may have to mute if something more comes up like that. So welcome. And the topic for our session today is our postdoctoral scholars. We have a session today that we hope will introduce our postdoctoral scholars to folks and help us all learn a little bit more about what it means to be a postdoctoral scholar. So, but we usually start with announcements, and we've got a few announcements that were also in this week's newsletter. And actually, Punya, do you want to jump in with some of the announcements?
Sure. Thank you, Betty. And just glad to be back for just an hour. I was gone for the past few weeks, so I missed, I think, some really exciting conversations. So it's good to be back. So in terms of quick announcements, Marina Basu, who is an LLT doctoral candidate, will be recognized by the Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, and Education Business Meeting at AERA in April for, I just read it the other day, and it's a really fascinating piece to read, which is called Krishnamurti's Insights on Observation for Global Childhood Education and Research. So congratulations to her. She will be going to AERA to pick up the award. Messeret, our colleague, won the CIA's Joyce Kane Award for Distinguished Research in People of African Descent for her work titled Gender While Navigating STEM Higher Education in Ethiopia. She will be recognized at the annual meeting of CIS in February in Washington, DC. So a bit of self-promotion here. Dana Hendrickson and I just recently published an edited book, which took a while in coming, but really excited about it. It's called Creative Provocations, Speculation on the Future of Creativity, Technology, and Learning. Some really wonderful pieces in that, including one by our colleague, Ron Beghetto. And finally, Lindsay Moses received a mini grant to support her research on co-designing instruction for teaching elementary students about various writing genres. Which makes me wonder whether ChatGPT-3 is going to be one of the tools that she might be exploring. To be seen, right? So Betty, with that, I'll turn it back to you to introduce today's session.
Okay, great. So for those of you who've just joined us, the focus for today, or the title, is Meet the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College Postdoctoral Scholars. So we've invited our currently 4 postdoctoral scholars to join us today, along with their faculty advisors or mentors for this conversation. And we have a couple of goals. The first really is to provide an opportunity for our postdocs to get a little more visibility in the college and share with us something about their backgrounds and experience. And I will say, from what I know already, they're quite a talented and accomplished group. So I'm eager to hear more from them. And the second goal is to talk a little bit more generally about the postdoctoral experience, how such positions are supported, what their benefits are, and so forth. And that's one reason why we've invited the postdoctoral faculty mentors here to provide some additional perspective on those topics. As usual, we've developed a few prompts or discussion starters, questions to ask our discussants, but we do encourage everyone during the conversation to post questions or comments in the chat, because we do try to allow some time to let everyone be involved in the conversation. So please remember to do that. And so we'll start by asking each of our postdocs to introduce themselves and their faculty mentors, so we know who's working with whom. And just looking at my screen, I guess I'll start with you, Carrie. So would you introduce yourself and your mentor?
Hi, I'm Carrie Karsgaard, and I'm a postdoctoral fellow funded by Canada's Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, and I'm working with Dr. Ivana Slavova here in Mary Lou Fulton. And it's great to be here today from freezing Canada, where I'm visiting right now.
I can't even think about -20. Thank you, Carrie Ann. Let's see, Pauline, would you introduce yourself and your mentor?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. Once again, my name is Pauline, and I'm so happy to be here. And faculty member is Iveta, but we also work very closely with Ann Nielsen in the office, and I'm happy to share more about my background and what we are doing in the office. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Francheska.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Francheska Figueroa, and I am working with Dr. Brian Nelson, and I am also thrilled to be here.
And Hung.
Yeah, hello everyone. Really nice to meet you and see some familiar faces. My name is Hung. My surname is Duong. Please call me Hung. And currently I'm working in the Office of Global Engagement with Professor Iveta Silva and our director, Ann Nielsen. Yeah.
Thanks so much. So what we'd like to do to kick off the discussion is, again, to have each of you tell us a little bit about the research you're involved with and your position here at the college, as well as the kind of research you're involved with individually or for your own professional growth. And I'm going to go in reverse and ask Hung to start us off.
Yeah, very happy to talk about myself. In today's session, it's really a great chance for me to share more about my background and my research, and also my passion as well. So as some of you know, prior to ASU, I did my postdoc for 2 years in Minnesota at the Minnesota University. And the research that I was involved in is a very large international research program called RISE, Research on Improving this education systems. We focus a lot on how to establish research base related to education and improving education in the global south, including some countries like Tanzania, Nigeria, Vietnam, and some other South Asian countries. And then I moved down here at ASU, and currently I'm working closely with Pauline, Iveta, and in a project called e-learning initiative. And Pauline also working with me in the evaluation and research team, and we are very happy to talk more about this research together. For my own research project, I have a background in comparative and international education, and I'm super happy to work with Iveta, my former advisor here. And she's the one who made me fall in love in the area of comparative and international education. So I'm really appreciate her guidance and mentorship. So working across some different international research projects, I find that my background is really helpful to help me gain more experience and consolidate my expertise in international education and also in development work in general. Previously, I've been very interested in understanding how education system across the places engage in preparing and developing young children to become good citizenship in their societies. So my doctoral research focuses on citizenship education in the context of Vietnam when it transitioned from the centrally based economy to more market-based economy. It has been a wide range of, different research areas I've been involved in, but I find comparative and international education really fascinating areas to work on. Thank you so much. And I love to hear more from your experience as well.
Thanks, Hung. That was great. Well, thank you so much for the overview. And citizenship education sounds like a fascinating topic for comparative education, if that's what one of the things you're pursuing. So hopefully we'll hear more about that as the conversation goes on. Let's move to Francheska. Can you tell us a little bit more about the research you're involved with Brian and your own professional interests?
Sure. And so before I go into the research, I feel like I need to give you a little bit of my background so you'll see the connection. So I am a former ELD, ESL high school teacher, and I moved into the industry sector for 13 years. I was working with the authors of the Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol and delivering workshops around the country for administrators, teachers, coaches who were interested in using the model to develop students' English language knowledge. And when the pandemic hit, I was grounded like most people who travel for business. And interestingly enough, I realized that I really enjoyed being home. And I also discovered that I had an entire ecosystem in my backyard, which thrilled me. Being on the road all the time, I didn't have an opportunity to enjoy my home base. And so I reached out to one of my mentors, Dr. Eugene Garcia, who was also the content expert of my dissertation committee, and he recommended that I apply for a postdoc position. And so I went to work and I found this postdoc position with Dr. Nelson, and I have to tell you, so the title is Accessible Computational Thinking in Elementary Science Classes Using a Culturally and Linguistically Diverse Context. And I was like, what does computational thinking mean? So I had to research that. And I looked it up and I thought, well, I'm not an elementary science teacher and I don't really know much about computational thinking, but I do have a background in culturally and linguistically diverse contexts. And one of the suggestions that Dr. Garcia gave me is to think outside the box. And he said, take risks. And so I took a risk and I applied for the position, and Dr. Nelson reached out to me. We interviewed, and the rest is history. And I have really enjoyed being a part of the research team and, to make a connection to my research interests. So it's, I'm really about social justice issues surrounding English learners. And I've been able to work with a couple of members of our research team to write papers and deliver presentations about accessibility to English learners and multilingual learners using accessible computational thinking or making computational thinking accessible to them. So, I have definitely grown a lot over the past year. And, I really, really appreciate the fact that I have a research team who has been supportive, collaborative, and understanding. And I've also humbled myself to ask a lot of questions. And so, so thank you again for having me.
Thanks so much, Francheska. I love the story about how you wound up working with Brian. I was watching Brian's expression as you were talking about through some of that, and it was a mixture of sort of a little surprise and pleasure. So I'll be interested to hear his side of this. Pauline, could you say a little bit more about what you're working on?
Sure, thank you so much. And like everybody else, I start with my background. So for me, I was born and raised in Kenya, and then I went to Michigan State University for my master's and a PhD program, where I did a master's in educational policy. I graduated during the pandemic, so I wrote everything virtually. in 2021, and then I joined Teachers College September of 2021 as well. And my research interests are in inequalities in education, and my dissertation focused on access policies and what was the implication in actual access and quality of learning. And I did East Africa, coming from East Africa, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. And I couldn't travel for data collection, so I used secondary data set to compare 6 data sets across countries, which are similar and different in many ways, and within the country also over time. So that's where my research interests are. And for access policies, I know it is broad, but here for me, I meant having free primary education policies, just eliminating school fees so kids can go to school, and what that meant for real access and quality of learning measured by reading, there's a lot of discussion around that. Yeah, so talking about the project that we are doing together with Duong. So I'm blessed enough to, once the project started, I've been part of the project. It started in mid 2021, although I joined in September. And it's a large project, which is implemented through MasterCard, funded by MasterCard, which is also an implementer, and also implemented also by ASU. And within ASU, there are 4 implementing units. We have Ed Plus, Teachers College, Global Academic Initiatives, and University Design, UDI. So there, and also we have a university in Kenya whereby we collaborate in everything that we do. And for us in Teachers College, we do the research part, monitoring, evaluation, research, and planning. So everything we do is really collaborative. And just to give an overview, the project came as a response to COVID-19, and just to ensure institutions, how do they have the capacity to ensure that they are able to offer studies or to students everywhere. So there are 10 participating institutions, 8 of which are in Africa, 1 is in Lebanon, and another one in Costa Rica. So we're in what we are calling first phase, which is supposedly up to June, and hoping to continue to other phases. But that's what we've been doing. And I'm going to put some links here after I finish talking, so that if anyone is interested in just learning briefly what we do. And just on the question of how what I'm doing right now aligns with my work. First, it's about addressing inequalities in access of education. Although it is not directly to what I did for my dissertation, I see a lot of similarities, because this initiative is trying to see how it can support the institutions so that students who are disadvantaged in one way or another can be able to study in different places. So that's one connection I see, and it's been a very, very busy project, I can say, because there was nothing that was started, and now we've done so much. I've learned a lot of administrative work, a lot of research, we traveled during COVID to 5 countries within 3 weeks, which was a lot, and collecting a lot of data virtually. During COVID, I meant 2022, we are still during COVID, early 2022. So a lot of learning and a lot of lessons on how we can make everything better. So I'm happy to answer questions or clarify anything. Or if there's anything else I've not said as I was talking, I'm happy to respond as well. Thank you so much.
That's great, Pauline. Yeah, there'll be time for more questions later. And do feel free to share links in the chat. Anyone else who's talking about projects or things, please do, so that folks who are interested can follow up. So Carrie Ann, your turn. What are you working on?
Well, yeah, it's really exciting to be here as a postdoc at ASU, and interesting because I get to work on independent research that I proposed for my grant. And so in that sense, I'm really extending my work from the past. So I guess some of the questions that is sort of the core of my questions surround the links between social, environmental, and epistemic justice in education. And I moved across a few different disciplines and different projects over the years. And so I've been a teacher. I worked in university student services and international and anti-racist education. and also worked on policy at UNESCO. So I love working across the whole education system in research, but also in informal sites like social media. And so to get to where I am now, just like everyone else has been doing, a little trajectory. My master's looked at kind of critiquing humanitarian efforts or texts in schools as a way for learning about global citizenship and working with post-colonial feminist standpoint theory. And since then, I've always sort of been situated within anti-colonial kinds of positioning. And so in my PhD, I switched a little bit and became interested in the ways that, social injustices, with race and gender and those kinds of things intersected with the land, and began to look at extraction and environmental issues in Canada and the ways that decision-making has been shaped through colonialism and, racism towards Indigenous and other communities. And so my PhD looked at Instagram, actually, and Instagram expressions surrounding a pipeline controversy that's not unlike the Dakota Access Pipeline in the US, but was a Canadian issue. And looked at Instagram as a place of learning, of teaching and learning around this issue, and really as a space for anti-colonial public pedagogy about a land-based issue. And so the ways that sort of the platform intersects with coloniality in decision-making and activism around the land. And so now, this is where I am now, is sort of working in that same area, but I've become really interested in how people express climate and environmental change or catastrophe on social media. And so I'm looking at this time looking at forest fires and how people post about them on Instagram and TikTok. And there's a scholar who describes the aesthetics surrounding forest fires as being a burning aesthetics, a kind of apocalyptic imagery that erases all of the political relations underlying the causes and impacts and decision making around forest fires. But I don't know that that's quite true on social media. I think a lot of people are really interested in industrial logging and colonial extraction. They're really interested in Indigenous fire practices and the ways that Indigenous people prepare for the forest through fire. And they're concerned with decision-making and fire response. And, we had a Indigenous community burned to the ground in Canada about a year and a half ago, and this is deeply, concerning for the public. And so I think there's something more going on than just sort of an apocalypse. The world is burning. There's something to be learned from social media about the ways we understand these issues. And so as far as the link back to education, I think there's education happening on social media, but also thinking about, climate and environmental education. How can it connect to our places, to our social relations in our places, to address these changes that are happening immediately around us in education. So drawing links between social media and formal education.
I graduated.
So that's the joy of the project I have now. And around that, because I get to work with Iveta, I also have all kinds of other things going on that are not my direct research, but as a postdoc, I have the opportunity to, connect my thinking with the thinking of others in around me. I work with many people on this screen, Gustavo and Anne and others and Punya. And so I'm also finding new roads for research as well.
So once the political rhetoric started tightening,
Thanks so much, Carrie Ann. Well, all of you are involved in such fascinating projects. I want to open up we do have some other prompts, but just to see, are there any questions or comments or things that anyone here would like to ask of our postdocs, given what you've heard of their interests and their work so far? No?
So I just have a comment quick. Carrie has been working on this grant that we're writing for Spencer Foundation, working with this organization in India called Quest Alliance. And she's bringing her perspective and research, expertise. And that's been a great process. So we are getting ready for the final push on that in a couple of weeks. So very excited. And of course, Anne is a part of that whole thing. And Dana is the PI on that with Carrie and a couple of other people. So it's a very exciting project and looking forward to getting that grant in and keeping our fingers crossed.
Sounds great. We have one other question for the postdocs, but maybe we'll switch to the mentors. And Punya, do you want to pose a question or two for the mentors to get them involved?
Sure. So, and this might be, the question might be of interest to others who are interested in getting postdocs. So, what was sort of the process that you went through when you were defining the position, finding the right person? So, Brian, I would be very curious about, how Francheska, once she applied, that you found something there that you're like, oh, this might be actually add to the work that I'm doing in some interesting ways, possibly. So we'd be just curious to understand like what the process is that you go through. And then there is also, there's a parallel piece about, you have your own research interests and your team, while the postdocs are bringing their perspectives, their interest. How does that how do you manage and navigate that? I will, I don't know, Brian, start with you since I mentioned your name as we started. So sure, if you don't mind.
So when we were writing the grant proposal, this is before I had met Francheska, it's a large grant between ASU and collaborators in University of Maryland. And we needed a lot of areas of expertise, including culturally responsive teaching and elementary science education and computational thinking. And that we had some faculty on both sides who had some of those, but nobody had everything. And what I didn't have really at ASU in terms of the sort of skills and background I needed was somebody who knew a lot about culturally diverse settings, which thank goodness Francheska brought with us, with her. And then I had some background in English language learners, but not enough. So when we were writing the proposal itself, that's where we were sort of defining the roles. We have 3 postdocs on the grant. We have Francheska, and then we also have Janice Mack here at ASU, who's a half-time postdoc who helps bolster our computational thinking side of things. And then we have a postdoc at University of Maryland as well, who on their side, they didn't really have folks who do the computational thinking. So they brought in somebody there, and the culture responsive teaching, they wanted some support there as well. So a lot of it was at that stage, sort of in formulating the vision of the project itself and looking for complementary skills that we needed to bring into it. So that's where it started. And then we got lucky and got funded. And Janice Mack was already here. And so she started right in, and then we ran a search, put together a search committee and went out, and we're delighted to find Francheska because she, I already have some of the science ed background and some of the other pieces, but I definitely did not have the pieces that she has and the experience that she had. And we're also very excited about the background that Francheska brought in industry doing professional development all over the country, since ours is a professional development grant in large part. So that's how it started, and that's how we were fortunate to find Francheska.
Thank you. Moving on, I think Iveta, do you have a couple people here you could talk about?
Yeah, I can share some of the strategies we used, and we actually had completely different ways of connecting with postdocs, even in a small group of people on the screen. So for the MasterCard Foundation project, actually was very similar to also Brian's strategy, where we were developing a project proposal for the MasterCard Foundation and very deliberately wrote in actually 2 postdoc positions in that proposal, because we knew we needed to complement our skill sets, but also our connections and knowledge of the particular geopolitical context within which the project was happening. So we wrote in 2 postdoc positions that were funded and did a national search for those positions. We hired 2 people, and one of them, after a year, actually got a faculty position in George Washington University. So she left, but it was a really nice bridge for her. And then we brought Hong more recently into the postdoc position to have 2 people. So that was one. So that was definitely kind of complementing the skill sets that we already have and expanding our knowledge of the context and connections. But then with Carrie's situation was completely different, and that was really nice. So Carrie actually was the one that initiated the application and the search through the Canadian Research Council on Humanities and Social Sciences, the SHRC, and went through a very competitive fellowship process and was awarded a 2-year postdoc to come to Arizona. And it's very unusual also because most of these SHRC fellowships, postdoc fellowships, go to Canadian universities to support the Canadian, I guess, higher education infrastructure and talent. And so in this particular case, we were super lucky that they thought that the fit between Carrie's interests and what ASU has to offer was strong enough to support it. So that was very exciting. And but 2 very different strategies. And I think keeping an eye open for all of these opportunities is really exciting and important, because these postdoc opportunities may come in multiple ways. And these are just a few examples that we shared. But I just feel lucky that we have these new colleagues joining us.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for that. So Gustavo, on to you. I have a follow-up question for the 3 of you, but I'll wait for Gustavo.
I will abstain because I'm not working with any of these postdocs directly, and I didn't recruit them. I have other postdocs before, and and others that are coming, but let's go to your next question.
Yeah, so the question I had was, and this is sort of because there were sort of 2 strategies that emerged, right? So one is you write postdocs into a grant, and the other is where serendipity sort of happens and you run with it, which is rare. So strategically, it's writing postdocs into a grant. So I'm just curious about, those of you who are writing these grants, like there's a decision that you have to make between going with a grad student possibly or a postdoc. Like what are some sort of things that people should keep in mind as they think about sort of the research? Because, there are costs associated, there are all kinds of, things associated with it. So I would just be curious to, and Gustavo, given that you have done this before, this might be something you could speak to as well. But I'll just open it to whoever wants to talk about this, because I think that's an important thing for other faculty to sort of think about, is like on what basis are we deciding whether it makes sense to go for a postdoc versus to go for grad students? Because there is value in both. In one case, you're building the next generation of scholars. Here, you're getting a certain amount of expertise coming in. So what are your thoughts on that? So I'll just leave it open for whoever wants to speak to that.
I just want to make a brief comment about that. It's all about funding. It's always about the money. And remembering that postdocs in education are a relatively new phenomenon. There were not that many postdocs in the field. And for me, it's, there are very different skill sets between postdocs and graduate students. And if you have funding for 3 years for a graduate student, it's going to have equal to the cost of 1 year of a postdoc. So depending the funding and the length of the project and the skills that you need. Right now, it's exploding. There are as many postdocs advertisement as tenure track jobs. So it's getting more competitive, and but I think it's a great experience. At least the ones that I work in the past, everybody that started with a postdoc after 2 years found a job in a tenure track position and with more publications and good research experience. So I think it's a great starting point for an academic career.
That's interesting because that's typically been the model in the sciences, right? I mean, very rarely in the sciences do you go directly from a PhD to a faculty position. So I'm guessing that that's sort of similar trends within the education space as well. So I don't know, Iveta, Brian, if you wanted to add anything to what Gustavo just said.
Just pretty similar, I guess, is funding and what the needs are for the project you're working on. And then specific to our setting in the Teachers College is that we're very fortunate to be able to work with our LLT PhD students as part of the funding for many of the students. So we have the benefit of, if we can recruit some of those students onto our project, we don't need separate funding for them. So like on the project that Francheska and I are working on, we've had 4 LLT students working on the project and still have 4 now. They've rotated. And so that allowed me to, when designing the project, to think of strategically putting funding towards postdocs.
Oh,
that's really interesting. Huh. I just wanted to say really quickly, for the MasterCard Foundation project, we were really lucky because we were able to write in funding for both postdocs, but also a graduate student as well. So we just went for as much as possible we could. But yeah, I agree. I mean, just so much funding driven, right? But I think, but we ran into also some kind of complications at Teachers College, because the way our advising operates is that there are some students who may be interested to work on the project, but if they're not assigned to a particular faculty, they may have difficult time joining the project, right? So it needs to, I guess, some work behind the scenes needs to happen to be able to match the people and projects in ways that are meaningful. And it's not always possible. I mean, most of the time it's possible, but not always.
So Claren is running this parallel chat on the side. So maybe just bring that to the foreground. So one question Claren had, and Carrie, you sort of answered that, but would be curious to hear from also the faculty on this, given COVID and given that, working remote has, is a little bit more accepted now. What are the sort of ways in which people can do this postdoc work remotely? How much, or do you expect that people should be here? And what are the postdocs experiences on that? I'm just curious to understand that.
Well, and I just wanted to chime in too. I'm thinking of any of our doc students who are listening to this. Again, I'm just it was like an aha moment, but if they are looking for postdocs and one's way across the country, is that really, should that deter them at all if they weren't planning to relocate? So that was kind of one thing. And then, yeah. And then from the faculty perspective too, maybe that opens up their access to people that have a skill set that they need.
Maybe I can just say, I don't have a direct response, but I can just say it depends. It might depend on the project and what about the applicant, the faculty, and the project needs and the restrictions, if there are any, because I know for international students, there might be some restrictions on what you can do and can't do compared to a US student at this case. So there are those other things to consider. And also maybe the project as well. For example, the project that we are doing, I think the way it is set up, I can work effectively from anywhere. Everything is online shared because we have a lot of collaboration. So I think it also depends on the project, because I can work from anywhere very effectively. I think that's what I can comment.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in here as well. So for our project, most of our meetings do happen via Zoom because we are working with, another set of research members from University of Maryland. But we are also working with teachers locally. And so in that instance, myself and the other postdoc have needed to be available to go to schools and collect data and work with teachers, deliver professional development. So we have done a lot of work locally. And so, I'll have Brian speak to this, but I think it's important that the two of us are local so that we can make those connections with the teachers.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that was, since we're working locally, we really needed somebody who's local. And another nice thing about Francheska is that she was in the area too. So we didn't have to worry about trying to move somebody in town.
Yeah, and you had answered me in the chat, Brian, but I guess just kind of thinking about and budget stuff, we don't have to get into the technicalities of it, but I suppose in theory, depending on what you're looking for, you may have applicants that could be GRAs or postdocs, depending on their research and past experiences. So I'm guessing from your experience, it was like, okay, well, you needed this postdoc position. So if you have to cut the budget, then kind of one or the other. Is that how NSF posed it to you?
They posted that, so we wrote in a full-time postdoc and a half-time postdoc and then one grad student. And the program officer said, we think you can probably accomplish the work you need to do with the two postdocs. And they were looking for places to cut. Like I said, I've never had a grant given that the program officer didn't ask for a cut to something. So in this case, that was a suggestion that they gave for us to cut.
And I'm just following up on your other question, Claren. So maybe Juliana, you could speak to this question that Claren had around differences in writing in postdoc versus this. What are kinds of things that faculty or students should be thinking about?
Yeah, it's very different audiences and perspectives. From a faculty or a PI perspective, I think it matters of what are the needs of the project and what resources and level of expertise, experience, background is going to fit that need. From the student's perspective, so I think Pauline kind of touched on, there's considerations like visa. Are they allowed to work on campus, off campus, on projects in the community? Who's allowed to pay them while they're in country, on campus, et cetera. So there's those types of considerations. And also what type of position is being proposed. So is it something that's going to be a mentorship position? NSF often will require a postdoc mentoring plan if you're going to write that into. So that's a whole other time commitment and consideration from the very early proposal and design stage that has to be written in. Or is it that you need someone with, statistical background, a very specific set of expertise that maybe perhaps a graduate student could do? And so again, from that PI perspective and designing the project, be explicit about what you need and be targeted in what you're asking for with any part of really a proposal and request for funding. But if a graduate student can do it, then write that in. And if the college can support it, that's the other thing. I heard about the logistical challenge. If we don't have the right pipeline and system set up to where you can access what those types of students that have a specific skill set, that's another thing to consider. Do we have those resources?
Thank you. Thank you.
I might just add one thing to that too, that a lot of the postdoc postings that I've seen also are interested in having the postdoc supervise other grad students. And so if you are hoping to create a more distributed project or want to take some work off of your plate, I think that sometimes that's another reason perhaps to hire a postdoc instead of a GRA.
Oh, that's such a great point, Carrie, that you mentioned there, because I think it works both ways. I think that there's partly, which is that, it is helping the faculty or the team there but I think also it's also preparing you for the next stage of your career where you'll be working with doc students, because I know, like, I went straight from a PhD to, I know, my first dissertation defense, that I was called into. I felt I was not prepared for that at all. It was like 6 months ago, I was on the other side of the table, and now you're asking me to, do that work. So I think that's also, I think, beneficial to the postdocs as well, in your growth in that space. So I see Gustavo has his hand up. Gustavo, please.
Very short. We are treating postdocs as, there is only one model of postdocs, but there are plenty of models of postdocs. And at ASU, we get a very good track record in receiving very senior faculty that are in other universities and they're having their sabbaticals. And those are also called, postdoctoral stages. And particularly right now, many countries in Europe, China, India, Pakistan, Brazil, they are, sending postdocs because, after COVID, they have that money that they save for a couple of years. And if you get requests of postdocs, not all of them are, scams. Some are, be aware, but there are great opportunities to expand research agendas, to learn new things, to expand, and they cost nothing for the college. And it's a very good resource. So there are those postdocs that we have to pay, and then there are postdocs that are coming with their own resources, like in Carrie's case, but for senior faculty. So those are also very interesting.
And thanks, Gustavo, for bringing it up. And we have very kind of clear, concise instructions on how to support, especially international faculty or postdocs in getting into the ASU system, right? How to become an international visiting scholar or postdoc. And I will post the link into the chat so it's easily accessible. But it's a great way to connect with other people. But I still think that we can be doing so much more to engage all of our visiting scholars and postdocs into the kind of broader academic community. And it would be great to discuss with everybody else what we can do better to create spaces to connect the faculty, postdocs, visiting scholars, students in the intellectual community.
Thank you. Vera, that's such an important point. I would actually love to hear from the postdocs, because this is one of the challenges, and Betty, you and I and Clarin and pretty much every Iveta, we have talked about that being distributed across 3 campuses, not having the departmental, but having a division unit, and all of these things sort of work against building a sense of community even at the college level. And I'm just curious about, when you come in as a postdoc, I mean, did you feel that you had the support and stuff you needed to become part of this broader community, or was it a little bit harder and that we could do better? Because I think that'll be useful information for us as we think about this. I'm just curious to hear about that, your experiences with that. Yes, go ahead.
Before addressing that point that you raised, thank you, Punya. But I would like to come back to Iveta's point first, because I really echo that suggestions, because as some of you may know that my background before getting a PhD degree in the US, I had more than 10 years teaching in a 4-year college in Hanoi, Vietnam. So that means that my background in teaching and being a faculty member in Vietnam and in some other countries helped me realize the need of many people, many colleagues who really want to be a visiting scholars or visiting kind of postdoc in a new university in, for example, ASU. So I would be very happy to make that connection happen, because I know that we really welcome international visiting scholars, while we also have connections, and we know the needs of other people, other colleagues in other countries who really want to come to us to do this. So related to the question that you asked about the support that we need for our postdoc position, I think this is really a great time for me personally, because when I do postdoc both in University of Minnesota and here at ASU, I find that resources are the most important things that we may need in doing our research projects, as well as in collaboration with other faculty and colleagues at the university. So I think that whether we are based on campus or off campus, resources are very, very important and helpful for us to fulfill our research work. I think that other people can add some more idea to this, but I really appreciate what I receive in terms of resources and also support from faculty where I'm based now at ASU.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Sure, I can go. Yeah, I know Francheska, I've seen you also wanted to say something. Yeah, so for me, I would say like at ASU, there's also the postdoc office, and that has been providing a lot of support and other resources. There's someone who we can reach out to. And being a grad student at Michigan State, I think I did not hear anything of like a postdoc office somewhere, and there were some postdoc in the college, for example. So that's something really great that is there, like to provide support to our postdoctoral students. But this is which is broad as well. But also in the college, in our office, we have also great support. But just speaking for myself, I feel like I've not had opportunities like to interact and to interact with other people within college. I can say I know very few people being here more than a year, other than the people like we interacted in the Office of Global Engagement. So I don't know how best it can be done such that different people in different units can get to know what is happening, collaborate, support each other, ask questions, share their research and things like that. Yeah, that's what I would comment.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so I'll add to that. When I first started this position, I was overwhelmed because I went from a very different setting, right? Industry to academia. And so, my job was very autonomous. I was out in the field working, alone. I was given direction from my managers, but I was basically, out in the field, not collaborating with anybody other than my audience. And so coming into this position, I really had to change my mindset and adapt to this culture of collaboration. And I really depended on Wiley Larson and the Postdoctoral Affairs Office, and had a lot of support going to different meetings, we even went to dinners where I was able to interact with other postdocs and get their experience and their guidance. And I also, had an open dialogue with Brian where I felt confident and comfortable coming to him and letting him know how I was feeling, whether it was imposter syndrome, insecurity, whatever I was experiencing. And so, I'm grateful for that, the dynamic that he and I have established during this mentor-menteeship. And so, but I do agree with Pauline that it would be nice for us to be able to have more opportunities like this to have conversations with faculty.
Well, you're always welcome to the Just an Hour. That's part of the reason why we started this series. So I hope you're getting those emails. We hope to see you more often here, because this is a large part of what this really is about, in that sense. Carrie, do you want to add anything before I'm looking at the time as well? So
Sure, I'll keep it short. I mean, my experience has been largely positive. I think, like most postdocs, and looking for opportunities to collaborate on research and writing projects, to connect with grad students, and begin mentoring grad students and learning about that process. And also, a number of us are international students. Even from Canada, it's a very different, academic ecosystem. And so, getting familiar with that space is, all of these things have been really, really valuable for me. I think for me, most of the challenges have been like logistical in the sense that I don't think ASU is familiar with the Canadian funding agencies, and just that my category as a visiting scholar has mostly just posed all kinds of frustrations, and Yvette has been an excellent advocate on those fronts. But the systems are challenging sometimes, and so even this is something I will probably articulate to my funding body here, but that they need to provide more support for students who travel internationally. But ASU's postdoc office might also expand its familiarity with different kinds of funding agencies internationally if they continue to accept students from abroad. But that, other than that, I think most of my experiences have been really, really positive, and that I consider many people here, Punya and Gustavo and Anne, to also be mentors in that space. So yeah, really, really thankful in that front.
Cool, thank you. Betty, any question or comments that you would be seeking before it's at 56, we have like 3 minutes before we wind down.
Just that we need to think of more opportunities like this. I saw some discussion in the chat about having the postdocs talk with potentially doc students or others about their dissertation process, which I think would be a great idea that we could follow up with, maybe with the doctoral programs. So hopefully this will be the start of more conversations for all of us together.
Oh, so Carrie, you have not been receiving the emails for this just an hour. All right, to be fixed. Okay, well, we have these every Friday, different topics. So, and it's been awesome. So what are the announcements for the next Just an Hours coming up? Betty, do you want to do that? Do you want me to do it?
Well, we're excited actually next week to be introducing a topic that Punya and I hope to follow up with a more in-depth session. And this is forget our title, Punya. It's reimagining our syllabus, humanizing.
No, creating a more humane syllabus.
Yes, more humane syllabus. Yeah.
This has been, just to briefly, when I create the syllabus, there's these huge sections that I don't even read because they've been mandated on me by the university. So this is like, the user agreement that you sign, that you click OK on without ever reading when you download like an app or a piece of software. And our syllabi, I think, have increasingly become like that, distancing ourselves from our students, becoming, the sections which we write are small, and we are always being sort of worried about sort of legal ramification of this and that. And I don't think that our syllabi are as welcoming to students at large, maybe even worse so for students who are minority students and so on. So this has been something that we have been talking about internally for a while, and I think it would be a worthwhile conversation, to learn from each other about how things that we have done individually, but also to set up for a workshop that we would like to do, where we would like to look at all this legal prose that we're supposed to include, and then how can we make it more accessible and useful for students. So, I think literally 60% of my syllabus, I don't read, the students don't read. But we have it for some bizarre reason, right? So I think we can do better than that. I think all of us can do better than that. So that's sort of the prompt for it. So looking forward to seeing all of you there. And then we'll follow up with the workshop. So thank you all for joining.